My name is Margaret Collins, and I was 64 years old when my daughter-in-law looked me in the eye and said, "You can eat in the kitchen. The dining room is for family." Room fell completely silent. 20 people sat around the beautifully decorated Thanksgiving table. My son lowered his eyes. No one defended me, not a single person. I looked at my daughter-in-law, Emily. She smiled as if she'd done nothing wrong. "Margaret," she said sweetly, "please don't make this awkward. Kitchen is quieter anyway." Few guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. One of my granddaughters looked like she wanted to cry, but nobody spoke. I simply smiled. "Of course," I replied. I picked up my plate and walked into the kitchen. As I sat alone, I could still hear laughter coming from the dining room. For a moment, I remembered another Thanksgiving. 27 years earlier. Back then, there had been no fancy dining room, no expensive house, no luxury furniture, just a tiny apartment. I worked 2 jobs after my husband passed away. I skipped meals so my son Daniel would never go hungry. Every dollar I saved went toward his education. Years later, when Daniel started his own construction company, I quietly loaned him every cent of my retirement savings. I never asked for interest. I never asked for recognition. I only wanted him to succeed. And he did. Today, everyone believed Emily had built this perfect life beside him. They had no idea where the first investment had come from. As I quietly finished my dinner in the kitchen, an idea came to me. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to cry. Instead, I was going to pay the bill, and by the end of the night, everyone at that table would understand exactly what family meant. I quietly washed my plate, poured myself a cup of tea, and listened to the laughter echoing from the dining room. Emily was entertaining everyone. "I planned everything myself," she bragged. "The decorations, the food, the seating. I wanted tonight to feel elegant." Several guests complimented her. Daniel remained unusually quiet. I noticed he hadn't looked at me once since Emily sent me to the kitchen. About 20 minutes later, dessert was served. Emily finally walked into the kitchen carrying a slice of pie. She placed it on the counter without meeting my eyes. "There," she said. "I didn't forget you." I smiled politely. "Thank you." Before she could leave, I asked one simple question. "Emily, who paid for tonight's dinner?" She looked surprised. "We did, of course," I nodded. "Really?" She crossed her arms. "Yes, why?" I reached into my purse and quietly pulled out a folded envelope. Inside was every receipt from the past month, the catering deposit, the bakery, the flower arrangements, even the rental company. Each receipt had only one name listed under payment, mine. Emily stared at them. "What is this?" "I paid for Thanksgiving." She laughed nervously. "No, Daniel told me he handled it. I transferred the money to him 2 weeks ago." Her smile slowly disappeared. At that exact moment, Daniel walked into the kitchen. He immediately recognized the envelope. His face turned pale. "Mom," Emily looked back and forth between us. "What is she talking about?" Daniel couldn't answer. I spoke calmly. "When Daniel called and said money was tight because of the new office, I offered to pay for the entire family dinner." Emily's eyes widened. "You never told me that." Daniel swallowed hard. "I didn't think it mattered." I looked at my son. It mattered. The conversation had become loud enough that several relatives gathered near the kitchen door. No one said a word for the first time that evening. Emily looked embarrassed, but I wasn't finished yet. There was one final surprise waiting in my purse. And before the night ended, everyone in that house would learn who had really been keeping this family together. The room had gone completely silent. Every guest was now standing near the kitchen entrance. Emily looked at Daniel. "Is this true?" Daniel slowly nodded. "Mom paid for everything." Emily's confident smile disappeared. She tried to laugh it off. "Well, she offered. I didn't know." I gently shook my head. "No, Emily, you didn't know because you never asked." I reached into my purse one last time. This time I pulled out a small leather folder. Daniel's eyes widened immediately. "You still have that?" "I've kept it for 20 years. Inside was the original loan agreement. 20 years earlier, I had withdrawn nearly every dollar from my retirement account to help Daniel start his construction business. The amount was $180,000. Daniel had insisted on signing a simple agreement promising to repay me someday. I had never asked for the money back, not once. I handed the document to Emily. She read it twice. Her hands started trembling. "Funded the company," Daniel quietly answered. "There wouldn't be a company without Mom." Guests exchanged shocked looks. Emily looked around the room. She had spent years telling everyone she and Daniel built everything from scratch. Now everyone knew the truth. One of Daniel's business partners finally spoke. "So Margaret was the first investor?" Daniel nodded. "Only one." Emily's face turned bright red. She looked at me. I'm sorry." I smiled politely. "Appreciate the apology." She took a step closer. "I didn't realize," I interrupted softly. "That's exactly the problem. You never wanted to realize. I wasn't embarrassed because you sent me to the kitchen. I was embarrassed because my own son stayed silent." Daniel couldn't hold my gaze anymore. His voice cracked. "Mom, I failed you." Several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Daniel did something no one expected. He walked into the dining room, picked up my dinner plate from the kitchen, placed it at the head of the table, and looked directly at every guest. This seat has always belonged to my mother. If anyone deserves respect in this family, it's her. Emily quietly began to cry, but the biggest surprise of the evening was still waiting. Daniel stood at the head of the table. He looked around the room, then, without saying a word, he picked up his own plate, walked into the kitchen, and sat beside me. The room fell completely silent. Emily stared at him. "What are you doing?" He looked directly at her. "If my mother eats in the kitchen, so do I." Nobody moved. One by one, the guests looked at each other. Then Daniel's older uncle quietly stood. He carried his plate into the kitchen. "So do I." Aunt Linda followed, then my granddaughter. Within 2 minutes, the kitchen was full. The dining room was almost empty. Emily stood there alone. The beautiful table she had worked so hard to arrange had become meaningless slowly. She walked into the kitchen. Tears filled her eyes. She looked at me. "Margaret, I thought respect came from appearances. I was wrong." She took a deep breath. "I'm sorry. Today, every cruel thing I've ever said. I don't expect you to forgive me." I smiled gently. "Forgiveness isn't the difficult part. Change is." She nodded. "I know." Then she surprised everyone. She carried my plate back to the dining room, placed it in the seat of honor, the one at the head of the table. She looked at every guest. "This seat belongs to Margaret. It always has." Daniel walked beside me. He gently held my arm. "Mom, will you come back to the table?" I looked around the room, then I slowly smiled. Only if everyone eats together. Nobody objected. That Thanksgiving became the first family dinner in years where nobody cared about expensive decorations, or who sat where they cared about each other. A few weeks later, Daniel visited my home alone. He handed me a check. "Mom, this is the first repayment." I looked at him and smiled. "I don't need the money." He shook his head. "I know. I need to keep my promise." I hugged him tightly. Months later, Emily began volunteering at a local food pantry, not because anyone asked her to, because she finally understood something. A person's value isn't measured by where they sit at the table. It's measured by how they make others feel welcome. Now, every Thanksgiving, Emily personally walks me to the best seat in the house. Not because I'm the one who paid the bill, but because she finally learned the greatest debt in a family can never be paid with money. It's paid with respect.